Okay, so we're going to start with the home price index. Then this is the Case-Shiller home price index. This is from the genius who is Robert Shiller of Yale University. And actually, before I even tell you about this, I'll tell you something that surprised me last week. It's not very often that Robert Shiller is taken by surprise, because this guy is just an absolute genius. But he said in an interview just last week, when the interviewer asked him, were you surprised at the home prices over the last year and also month on month? And he said, yes, I was extremely surprised by what's happened. I didn't expect these sort of numbers. If you look at most forecasts, including the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, a lot of the big organizations, they were expecting house prices to go down as much as 16% during the crisis. But that hasn't happened. So here's the historic prices then of the National Home Price Index. And of course, we know what happened in 2006 to 2007. We went into this home price crash, this housing market crash, before it started to pick up then in 2012. And of course, look at where we are right now. This is just insane, actually, where we are right now. Look at this growth. I mean, this is just a huge upward trajectory now. This is what we're looking at with the housing market. Now, the last time I made this video for you, we weren't anywhere near this. We were sort of down here sort of area. So you can see this climb is just getting sharper and sharper, the incline going up. But I do think this is going to slow down as we go into the end of the year. I think we're going to see a slowdown in this very steep curve upwards. But let me show you the next thing that I think is very important right now. This is the home price to income ratio, also known as the PE ratio, the price per earnings ratio in the housing market. And I just want to show you how relevant this is. So this was the last housing bubble here, where we hit a ratio of about 7 to 1. So that means it took 7 years for your household income to purchase your home. And that was a bubble. Now, of course, it came down and reached a manageable level at about 4.8. So this was a manageable level. Before that, we're about 4.2. I think that was manageable. But 4.8 was manageable. Now look where we are today. Look where we are today right here. We are now at 6.4. So we're not too far off now this peak that hit 7 in terms of the housing market going into this bubble territory again. And that's really crucial, and I'll come back to that. But I want to show you now the assets held outright. Now this is the shocking thing. If you haven't ever seen me talk about this before, you may not believe this at first until you do your own research, but this is the FRED data. So this is data from the Federal Reserve itself. This isn't a third party. This isn't me making it up. These are assets that are held outright by the Federal Reserve. So they're called securities. And let me just show you this. Last time I did this video, they were about here. I think it was about 4.3 trillion. So that means trillion, because this is in millions. So 4,300 million is 4.3 trillion. Now I'll show you why this is so shocking in a moment then. Because look where it's gone. 4.3, we're now at over 5, almost 5.1 trillion. Now you might say, well, what are these assets that you're talking about here? What are these things? These are a lot of it mortgage-backed securities. What does that mean, Neil? It means that the Federal Reserve is buying your mortgage, or doing a swap to be more specific, with the bank that you took your mortgage through. So you think you went to, whichever bank it was to get your mortgage, and your bank holds your mortgage. Possibly not. What has happened in a lot of cases is the bank has swapped these credit lines with the Federal Reserve so they could then loan out more money, more mortgages. And you can see here that it's 2.7, almost 2.8 trillion out of all of their assets. So here we go. The total here is 5.1 trillion. And of that, the mortgage-backed securities are 2.7 trillion. So let me just bring that up. So 2.7 trillion here. So that is of a market cap. So the whole mortgage market is worth 10.3 trillion. So bear with me on this. That means total mortgages outstanding, 10.3 trillion. If you average it, divide it by the average house price, means there's 56 million accounts. So a private institution that is neither federal nor a reserve of capital, because they create the currency out of thin air and they give this to the banks. So this is quite concerning, very concerning news. So if we average it out, 184,000 per account, that's 15 million. That accounts for 27% of the entire mortgage market, and it's going up. This is going up all the time, and that's what really concerns me, because as I said, yesterday's conspiracy theorist, like I was a conspiracy theorist last year on inflation. Today I'm accurate on it. No one says anymore, oh, it's a conspiracy. Well, what if there's something going on with why the Federal Reserve is buying all of these mortgages? That's one thing that concerns me. Why are they owning 27% of the mortgage market? I want to bring us on to this next Fred chart now then, and this is unemployment rate. Of course, they use the U3 unemployment rate, which is nowhere near the actual unemployment rate. You have to really go to U6 or even use Shadow Stats unemployment rate for a more accurate number on this. But we're just going to look at this U3, and of course this got to 14.8% in April 2020, of course when all the lockdowns and everything else began. And this has steadily come down. But you can see, even at 6.1%, this is almost double what it was in January 2020 before the whole COVID crisis began. So this is, and the funny thing is, the media keep celebrating. You see every week they're smiling, oh, great news today on all the job numbers. And no, it's not great news. The unemployment rate is still double, 100% more than it was in January of 2020. And one of my concerns is that this is going to get worse, especially if we go into this crisis that I see us going into at some point in the near future. I think the unemployment rate is going to get a lot worse. And that raises some of the other questions. And if you haven't seen my video on UBI, Universal Basic Income, I would definitely recommend watching that, because it raises a number of questions as to what will happen next with the US unemployment rate and labor force participation. I'm going to show you that in a moment, but this is the other thing to be aware of. So here we have Shadow Stats, shadowstats.com. Highly recommend this site, and it shows the U3 rate, the U6 rate, which is more accurate, and that sits at about 11% there. But then it shows Shadow Stats' actual alternative unemployment rate, which they put at 25.5%. Definitely some food for thought there on that. But now I want to show you the labor force participation rate, which I think is a much better metric than the unemployment rate. Now I just want to show you this for context. During the last crisis, even though the unemployment rate dropped down, the labor force participation rate stayed pretty much the same. So we went from 66 to 65.7. So really it didn't change at all, if you ask me. But then afterwards, it's been slowly dropping, this participation rate. And then we sort of plateaued here before going up in sort of 2019. But then look what happens once we get into the COVID crisis. And April 2020, the labor force participation rate dropped to just 60.2. And yes, it's come back up again, but still, it's still very, very low. And you might ask, why is this so low? Why is this participation rate so low? Personally, I think a lot of people have become dependent now on stimulus checks and the unemployment benefits, both from the state and from the federal government. Now, a lot of the states are blocking the federal unemployment now because they realize what a crisis this is creating. One of the reasons the federal government may not want to stop this unemployment or the stimulus checks is because this is helping with the velocity of money. It's helping to stave off deflation as well. It's helping to create inflation because all this new currency that's coming into the supply is having to be spent. People are going out and spending it. This is causing a shortage of certain items because people are going out and spending all of this additional money that they didn't used to have. But this, combined with inflation, is just helping to push up prices. So I personally don't think that that is a good thing. But I just don't see the labor force participation rate picking up the way they think it's going to sort of 65%. They would have to get back up to this sort of level, which they haven't had that level since 2009. So you're talking 12 years ago since we saw this sort of level. I just don't see that 65% coming back, which raises a lot of questions as to the unemployment rate going forward.